a song for ya.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, here with another part of the concerto. We are now looking at the second part of the second movement, and this is a little over 12 minutes long. It is 12, almost 12 and a half, 12:27 on the file. I'm going to guess at least 3 seconds are blank, so about 12:24. And we're continuing on from where we were. Now, as I said in the last episode, I believe that the way that they broke this up on the CD, and I still don't understand why they did it, but it was broken up basically because the format on the album required the second movement to be broken up to be able to fit the whole thing on a single vinyl. That I get why they kept it that way and didn't just merge the two parts of the second movement into one thing. Could have been because part A had an actual title that gave us a, basic idea of the tempo, but the second part is literally titled Part 2. So second movement, second part. There's no information about what to expect, what the tempo is going to be like, what the energy is going to be like. There's just nothing. And that's pretty weird. I can tell you this. If I wrote this today, let's say that this didn't exist and I wrote this today and I wanted to title it that and upload it, I would not be able to put it on iTunes because they require something more than just Part 2. And I battled with them on another project I had done a few years back where they didn't like the fact that I just put song number 1, song number 2, song number 3, song number 4. They actually would not accept it per my distributor. So I had to not put it out on iTunes. So the concerto, I believe, is available on iTunes. And, obviously, when you're Deep Purple, they're just going to do whatever, they're not going to care. For us independent artists, it was a really big deal for them. And I was not allowed to upload it through CD Baby at all. And in fact, it only appears on my Bandcamp page because the distributors would not allow me to title it that way. So it's very strange. I still think it's odd that John wouldn't have named it. Why would you name the first part, the first half of the second part, and then not given any indications on the second half of the second part and the third part? I really don't understand that. But you know what's most important to me? You guys that know me have been following me for a while. The most important thing to me is not all the shenanigans that go along with how things came to be, who was mad at who, all that stuff, unless it's relevant to the song. What I care about is how the music makes me feel. And as I've learned through doing the last 2 episodes, I remember nothing about this concerto except for the lyrics and a couple of little parts with the band. So this is something that I'm coming in really fresh to. And I say we jump right into it. Here is Part 2. So that was probably, a fairly reasonable place to break it up. I don't know if they were actually just out of time on side A and they had to just cut it where they did. So that could be because movement 1 was fairly long. But yeah, this is nice. I like it. I like the feel of it. It almost sounds, and I don't think there is because I don't recall seeing anything about a choir. I don't remember there being a choir, but it almost felt like there was a choir very quietly just resting on top of those instruments. I don't think there was, but that's really interesting how we get that sound. And of course, there's the continued background noise, the chatter and all that stuff going on. But yeah, I really like the feel of that. I thought that was really nice and a very smooth transition going from the strings into the organ taking over and then the drums coming in. That's probably the smoothest transition I think we've seen in the concerto so far. Okay, so that was obviously a representation of the vocal section, which is interesting because it was written before Ian wrote the lyrics, so they didn't know quite how the lyrics were going to flow, and this is very similar. So Ian may have just taken that segment and put it in his mind and said, okay, if this is what the instruments are doing, this is what I'm going to do on top of that, instead of just writing lyrics and figuring out how they're going to fit in. He may have gone that route because, obviously they weren't going to rewrite the orchestra's parts and all that. That would have been very time consuming and expensive. And since he wrote the lyrics at the very last minute, would have been a challenge to do. So he was kind of, boxed into what he had to work with. But I think the flow of it is really nice. It actually works very well as a musical passage as well as it does with the vocals over it later and what we heard earlier on the last episode. Oh, that's such a beautiful string passage right there. There's a lot going on, although it seems like there isn't, but there's a couple of nice layers in there. It's not linear. I like that. I like there's different instruments doing different things over the top of that instead of everybody just following one melody. There's a little more to it. But yeah, it's really nice. I love the sound of it. I love that there weren't any real high strings on top of that because it gives a bit of a darker mood, but it also just feels more emotional sometimes to not go the normal route and have like the higher pitched violins come in and do something that pulls the emotion out of you. It's a little more guttural to me to do it this way, and I think that was a great choice from John. And obviously another variation on the vocal section. This felt a little bit more dramatic to me. Partly, I think, because he went back to the higher strings, but also it felt like it just a little bit slower, and that will of course add drama as well. A little more patient, but a little more emotional, I would say. I like that though. I like the feel of that. It was nice. It was nicely mixed, actually. That blend of the different instruments, but also it feel like it had kind of like going from the low to the high notes. It had that it's a new day. It's spring. The snow and ice are melting away. Everything's fresh now. It had that kind of transitional feel to it. And I thought it was pretty nice. And I don't think I'm just saying that because it's just suddenly warmed up outside in the last couple of days. I think I'm saying that because that's actually what it sounds like to me. This is such an interesting contrast, and I have to say I'm a big fan of this because we've had this rolling percussion going on here for a bit, and then we've had some somber performances from the woodwinds, and they really feel kind of opposite, almost like, I'm just sitting here and thinking about things, and then you've got this almost tension coming from the percussion that's looming over everything like a dark cloud. And that's a nice trick because you're really bringing out two completely different feelings at the same time. And you're just waiting for the percussion to do something. At some point, it's got to crescendo, it's got to explode, it's got to vamp up. Something's got to happen with it. But at the same time, you're just feeling that tension while the instruments are being expressive and just, I'm talking about the woodwinds, they're just being really expressive and somber and not in a hurry to get to wherever the percussion's going. It's almost like they just want to stay under the blanket until the storm passes. Again, very nice transition going from orchestra back to organ. But what I really liked is that we didn't get this bombastic flourish of percussion. It showed itself, the storm came in, but it didn't turn into like this big epic explosive thing with, the band coming in playing rock or, some kind of crazy string thing after it. It was just like, I've been here all along. I want you to know that I'm here. I'm going to show my face and disappear. And I thought that was really cool because it's just too easy to go the explosive route, right? It's harder to build and maintain drama, different levels of drama to make it interesting. And I think, as someone who appreciates classical music, I was just expecting some big explosion, and then it would come in with the rock band. So I'm really glad he didn't do that here. I mean, I know we get rock band at some point, but I'm glad that we're still building here. I really like that. And right after I say all that comes the rock band, of course. But that's okay. It wasn't incredibly explosive. It was again a very nice transition. I feel like this part of it's really coming together for me much more than the first part did, and much more than the first half of the second part did. These transitions are nicer. It feels more cohesive. We're getting a lot of different things coming at us in this short time. We've only been listening for 4 minutes and 49 seconds of music, and we've had a lot of different parts to listen to, and some transitions and some tension, and it's really been quite a lot that we've covered in that time. So I think this is nice. I think this is a good point in the piece too, for there to be a little bit of flourish and something a little bit heavier for the audience to kind of, all right, we had the band, we've had vocals, now we've had some more orchestra. Now it's time for more band. I think this is a good place for that too. Um, and also, I mean, I wouldn't say to give the orchestra a rest, because they're used to playing 15, 20-minute movements and, not having long breaks in between. So it's not really taxing on them, I wouldn't think. Maybe listening to a rock band was a little difficult for some of them, but not all of them for sure. I remember on the Deep Purple podcast when they covered this and they were watching the video, they said one or two of the guys, I think, were tapping their feet to the band playing. So I mean, obviously some of them were enjoying it, and not every classical musician in 1969 was a stuffy, old school rock music isn't real kind of guy. So that's expected, but glad to hear that was the case just the same, because the rock music in here is really good. And I say we just get right back to it. Also, I really love what Roger's playing. I have to say that too. I think his part here is very interesting. It's melodic rhythm. It's keeping a groove, but it's bass for sure. I mean, he's definitely playing the role of bass in this and not getting like up in the higher registers at this point. But it's got its own kind of melody and rhythm to it, on top of just keeping the beat with the drummer. In the song "In the Court of the Crimson King" by the band King Crimson, shocker, there's this thing that they do. It's really like a multi-movement piece, and they'll do things like they'll talk about the puppets dance, and then they'll have the dance of the puppets. They'll talk about the witch, and then they'll have the part from the witch, and it feels like that's what we have here. We talk about, we hear Ian Gillan singing about, coming out and being cool, and then the flutes take over to this part, almost saying, here's a representation of that, here's what that's like, here's what we think that would be like. And so maybe I'm reading a little too much into that. It may be that, it may not be that. I don't know, again, what was in John's head, but it kind of feels like that, because the part that they played is kind of like just a light confidence. I feel cool, I feel like people are here to see me. And I think that was a well done musical representation of the lyrics that we just heard. Okay, that was kind of a weird transition. At first, I thought maybe he was going for the same thing. Now there's the, what do I do if it all goes wrong? So now it's like more fear and concern and insecurity. I don't know that I necessarily got that. It felt like it was going to go into another Richie solo section, which we've had a lot of already, which may have been in the way of appeasing him because he wasn't happy doing this project. But and then it stopped and then started up with a different type of solo. I don't know. That transition was a little weird for me. In 1969, I don't know if a heavier rock organ had ever graced the walls of the Royal Albert Hall, but let me tell you something. On this day, it certainly did. Killer performance from John. I feel like that was all probably written out, or at least sections of it were written out. It felt very well played, very well rehearsed, not spontaneous. Like I feel like what we're getting from Ritchie, which is pretty typical, is very spontaneous. But John, not only being the composer, but being somebody who reads music, I feel like he would have carefully charted all this out. I do think I remember seeing but it could have been the whole score that he was looking at because he had to follow the whole thing. I don't know, but I do feel like that was all written out. But what I love about it is the expressive nature of it. He's really using the drawbars to get the different tones. He's using the volume to really enhance or detract the intensity. Then he's bringing the beast into it and getting that grit at points. I mean, it's really a very dynamic solo section. And now we're blending back in with the orchestra again as we've gone back and forth between these different parts. But I mean, what he played was a little bit long, but I really felt it was very, very well performed. Wow, some parts of that really reminded me of a thinner sounding version, and I'm not knocking it by saying that. It's just a different style of writing and performance, but it felt like a thinner version of Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings. And I just checked because I was sure that was written some time ago. It was actually written in 1936. And anyone who's seen The Elephant Man or Platoon would know that piece of music. Very incredibly emotional piece for string quartet. Probably one of the most emotional pieces of music I've ever heard. Beautiful piece. I've heard it many times, studied it a little bit. But yeah, some of these parts in here are a little bit reminiscent of that to me. And again, maybe there was no connection. I don't want to say that's what John had in his head when he was, writing this, but I'm certainly seeing a little bit of a connection there myself. Yeah, cut off that audience. We don't want to hear the appreciation for this song. And that's a quick fade on them, wasn't it? Um, yeah, I like that. I like that passage. I think it was really beautiful. Where I find it a little strange is that we're not getting a lot of motifs in this concerto. We're not getting a lot of themes other than really that main vocal theme. I mean, we've had a couple of things that get touched on a little bit here and there, but really it just the whole piece just feels a little bit incohesive to me because I'm used to that style of writing. If Beethoven, obviously I've talked about him a lot. He's a big influence on me. And when I think about his music, I think about his themes and how he's always going back to that theme, going off in whatever direction, then coming back to that theme and bringing the whole orchestra back together and finding a starting point for a new thing. The third movement of the fifth piano concerto is a perfect example of that. They go off in so many different directions, but they all come back to this one spot. Then they have their launching point, and then they go off into whatever direction again. Then they come back. And I'm so used to that style of music that I'm finding this a little on the disconnected side. And maybe that's what it is, you guys. Maybe it's because that's my schooling in classical music. I've not really heard music that's written in this style. And I don't want you to think I don't like it. I don't want you to think I'm knocking it because I'm not. It's just a different style of writing from what I'm used to hearing. But because of that, I think that's why it feels so disconnected to me because we don't have those return points. We don't have those motifs, except for the one vocal part that we've heard a few times in this movement where they keep going back to it, whether Ian's on it or not, but they've returned to that one theme. Apart from that, I really haven't found any real connective tissue in all the way through the first and second movement. And I think that's what's throwing me off. Also, this movement just kind of faded into oblivion. There was no distinct stopping point where the audience could go, okay, the second movement is done now. Let's applaud. There was that kind of interim, are we supposed to applaud? Or, and I have a feeling that there had to be some kind of visual cue for the audience to know that it was done. Because otherwise, they've had those passages where they take 2 or 3 seconds of silence before the next, quiet, slow string comes in, or the organ comes back in, or the band just all of a sudden comes out of nowhere. So I don't know how they would have known that this wasn't just another one of those, as opposed to the ending of the movement, which should be clearly defined, I feel. And again, stylistic choice, I get that, but that feels very weird to me. Almost in the opposite way of the way like Cirque du Soleil does it. Cirque du Soleil is very confusing also. Even when I've seen the same shows over and over, I get confused when I'm supposed to applaud because there's times in the middle of the act when someone will do something and then they'll step forward all of a sudden and take a bow and then go back and do something else. And you're like, okay, well, you just took a bow, so I should clap. And I want to let you know I like what you did and I respect and appreciate your work here. But then they go do something else. And then you know that there's another time that you're going to clap for them. So then you do that. And then everybody in the act comes out and takes a bow. And you're like, okay, well, now I'm clapping for the whole act. Like, I don't know when to clap. It's very, very confusing at times. And I've always felt with classical music that, at least with the pieces that I'm familiar with, and again, I mean, I studied a lot of Beethoven, a little bit of Mozart, a little bit of Bach, and various bits and pieces here and there. But everything I've heard has always been well defined. Dun, 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 dun. End of the movement. Okay. End of the symphony. Okay. But just to kind of fade out into oblivion as an audience member who's never heard this piece before. It's not like they were able to listen to this on record and go to the Royal Albert Hall with any familiarity whatsoever. This is literally the first time in history that people are hearing this piece of music other than the people that were involved in it. So the audience doesn't have any clue that this is the end of the movement, which is why there's that pause before the clap. So there had to be some kind of visual. Maybe John turned and bowed to the audience or something to let them know the movement was over. Maybe the conductor did something. I don't know. I haven't seen the video in a long time. I'll have to go back and watch it, but there had to be something. Otherwise, it's just like you're just waiting to see what happens next. Beautiful pieces within the overall performance. Some really good transitions in this one, some beautiful performances. But again, I just feel like for the most part, it's very disconnected. And I'm really not sure, apart from the lyrics, and I'm not normally a lyrics guy, but I think they're very important in this piece. Um, I mean, they are in a song, but I usually just like, how does it feel? Not what am I told the story is versus how is this vocal as an instrument, like the guitar and the bass and the drums, how is it making me feel? That's what I want to get out of the piece of music. So without vocals though, I mean, this is just like, okay, you guys do something. Okay, we're done. You guys do something. All right. I don't know, band, why don't you do something now? It's your turn. John, we'll throw it to you for a little while. Like, it just feels like I don't understand the piece at all in that way. But I'm not knocking it. It's just me personally as a listener don't really understand it. So we'll see what we get to maybe tie together in the third and final movement when we get to that tomorrow, which I believe is just titled 3. So again, I've given up on tempos. It's just call it 3. Very strange for someone who is trained in classical music. I again find that a little bit awkward, but that's we get what we get. And I guess at the end of the day, the why doesn't matter. It's whether you enjoy it or not. That's the biggest point. But I admit I am a little perplexed at this piece of music because it really isn't like anything I've ever heard. And maybe there was just so much focus on switching back and forth between the band and the musicians that some of that got lost in the shuffle. I really don't know. And again, doesn't matter because it's whether you like the piece or not. I know I say that a lot. I'm really reminding myself more than I'm reminding you guys because I'm just so like, don't even know what to say. But I did enjoy the parts, the parts and some of the transitions I really enjoyed in this movement. It's been the best of the 3 pieces that we've listened to so far. And I'm anxious and excited to hear what tomorrow's offering is. And since that's our Friday show, guys, rest up over the weekend because starting Monday, we're starting in rock. And we're kicking it off with a bang. 3 versions of Speed King we're going to be taking a look at. So that should be fun. But for today, guys, thanks for listening. I hope that you're enjoying this bizarre analysis. I feel like of all the songs I've reviewed over the years, and I mean, obviously there's been hundreds of them and albums and whatnot, I'm just like, this has got to be the weirdest one I've done. I mean, it really has. But I'm enjoying it just the same. And from the bottom of my heart, I hope that you guys are too. Feel free to reach out to me if you like, if you have some thoughts on this one. You can reach me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com because of course that would be the Gmail for it. And of course it would be Gmail. Also, guys, I do have a Patreon at patreon.com. The link is in the show notes. There's also a Facebook group. It's a little small as I'm recording this, and that's okay because I'm not that enthralled with numbers. I'm not taking up as much with the numbers of who's following it as much as I am the listens. That's the most important thing because people who like a page or follow a page don't necessarily follow through and listen to the podcasts from that page. They might have signed up because, hey, my friend did something. Maybe they asked me to like the page or whatever. I don't really care, but I'll like it for them. And that happens. Some people are genuinely interested. Some people forget about it. Some people, are dedicated. There's all levels of things. So I don't care so much about those numbers. I care about the actual show listens, and the show is growing, which I'm very grateful for. And I know that this is a real weird time in the band. Mark 1 is kind of a kind of a lost and forgotten mark in some ways because the rock side of the band dominated it so much. And so I'll be curious to see what happens when I hit in rock and what, if any, those numbers change. But yeah, so follow the Facebook page if you like for the notifications. You can also sign up for the Patreon. There is a free tier if you just want the notifications and the link for the show coming out. If you do find that you are getting some value and would like to donate a little bit of money my way for my time and effort here, that is obviously very welcome. As of recording this, I have 2 patrons right now, William and Corey. Thank you both very much. And we will see you guys tomorrow for the third and final movement of the concerto. Have a great day, guys. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode and thanks for listening.